man kneels before an empty marble pedestal in a moonlit garden, his hands bleeding from carrying stones all night. Above him, nothing but stars and the weight of his own expectations. You know this man. Maybe you are this man. He builds shrines to women who never asked to be goddesses, then weeps when they prove mortal. Tonight, in this garden of his making, we watch him discover what Dostoevsky knew about the violence of worship. Marcus has been constructing this pedestal for 3 months, ever since he met Sarah at the coffee shop downtown. Each conversation they share becomes another stone. Her laugh when she mentioned loving obscure films, the way she touched her collarbone when nervous, how she said his name like it meant something. He carries these moments home and polishes them into sacred relics, building higher, always higher. The garden around him pulses with an otherworldly luminescence. Marble angels weep silver tears that never reach the ground, evaporating into mist that tastes of longing. The air shimmers with the phantom presence of every woman who has ever been placed on such pedestals, countless silhouettes of the idealized feminine, their faces shifting like smoke, beautiful and unknowable. Ancient ivy crawls up the pedestal's base, its leaves shaped like hearts that beat with a faint, desperate rhythm. In the distance, other men work on their own monuments, their silhouettes bent under the weight of carved expectations, their whispers forming a chorus of devotion and despair. The stones grow heavier with each layer. Marcus's fingers crack and bleed, but he cannot stop. Each text message from Sarah that goes unanswered for more than an hour sends him racing back to add another stone. When she mentions other friends, other interests, other men in passing, he builds frantically, as if height alone could make her notice the altar he's constructed in her honor. The pedestal now towers above the garden's ancient oaks, casting shadows across his blood-stained hands. Then Sarah arrives, not as the goddess he expected, but as herself. She looks at the towering monument with confusion, then horror. "Marcus, what is this?" Her voice cracks like limestone. "I never asked for this. I can't breathe up there." She's right. The pedestal reaches so high that the oxygen thins, that human warmth cannot survive. She turns and walks away, her footsteps echoing in the suddenly hollow garden, leaving Marcus alone with his impossible architecture. As dawn breaks, the pedestal crumbles, not from neglect, but from the weight of its own impossibility. Marcus watches his months of work cascade into rubble, each stone a memory now tainted with the metallic taste of his own delusion. In the wreckage, he finds what he was truly building, not a shrine to Sarah, but a prison for them both. The ancients called it idolatry. Today, psychology names it idealization, a defense mechanism first observed by psychoanalyst Melanie Klein, where we split people into all good or all bad to avoid the terrifying complexity of human wholeness. We see it everywhere. The colleague elevated beyond criticism until their first mistake destroys us. The influencer we worship until they reveal ordinary struggles. The romantic partner we transform into a savior until they need saving themselves. Modern dating apps have become digital pedestals where we swipe through curated perfection, building fantasies from carefully cropped photos and witty one-liners. Schopenhauer understood this cruel alchemy of desire. He would call it the will's most insidious trick to make us believe that possessing or being possessed by another could end our fundamental aloneness. The pedestal builder doesn't love the woman. He loves his own projected salvation, his own escape from the burden of being human. The will keeps us perpetually dissatisfied by promising that the next level of devotion, the next stone added to our shrine, will finally grant us the peace that can only come from accepting our own incompleteness. When worship becomes the foundation of love, both lovers suffocate, one under the weight of impossible expectations, the other under the rubble of their own illusions. What pedestals are you building in the dark corners of your heart? What stones do you carry, thinking they're gifts when they're really the materials for someone else's prison? And perhaps the most terrifying question of all, if you stopped building shrines to people, would you finally have to face the altar you've been avoiding? The one dedicated to accepting yourself as devastatingly, beautifully human. The garden remembers every pedestal that crumbled, every worshiper who learned too late that gods make terrible lovers and mortals make terrible gods. A woman sits across from a man in a restaurant where the candles never burn down and the wine never empties. Her smile is a scalpel, precision sharp and hungry. His chest rises and falls, but each breath seems thinner than the last. Watch her work. She is an artist, and emotional pain is her medium. You've known women like this, men too. Those who feast on the feelings they create in others, who find sustenance in the wounds they so carefully tend. Tonight, she meets her match, and we witness the moment a predator discovers she's been hunting herself all along. Elena has perfected her craft over decades. The restaurant itself seems designed for her rituals. Mahogany walls that drink in secrets, mirrors that reflect only what people wish they could hide, tables spaced just far enough apart that whispered confessions remain private. The air carries the scent of expensive perfume mixed with something harder to identify, the metallic tang of vulnerability exposed. Other diners move like sleepwalkers, lost in their own dramas of seduction and surrender. Their conversations, a symphony of need orchestrated by masters of manipulation. She watches David across the table, cataloging his micro-expressions with the precision of a surgeon mapping arteries. 3 months of careful cultivation have brought them here, the planted seeds of self-doubt, the strategic withdrawals of affection, the calculated revelations of her own manufactured traumas. His eyes hold that particular glaze of the emotionally addicted, pupils dilated with the chemical rush of intermittent reinforcement. She has trained him to crave her chaos like a drug. The crystal wine glasses refract the candlelight into 1,000 tiny suns, each one reflecting Elena's satisfied smile as David reaches across the table, his hand trembling slightly, not from desire, but from the withdrawal she's engineered. "I don't understand what I did wrong," he whispers, right on schedule. She has orchestrated this moment with the precision of a composer, knowing exactly which words will make his heart race and his confidence crumble. Around them, the restaurant hums with similar scenes of emotional cannibalism, the feeding ground where the broken feed on the breaking. But tonight, something shifts in the carefully controlled atmosphere. David's eyes clear for a moment, as if waking from a long dream. "You know what, Elena?" His voice carries a strange new timbre, steady where it once wavered. "I see what you're doing. I see how you feed." The color drains from her face as he continues, his words precise as her own scalpel smile once was. "The problem with emotional vampires is that you eventually run out of willing victims, and then you have to feed on yourself." The restaurant around them begins to change. The eternal candles flicker for the first time in years. The wine glasses crack with tiny spiderweb fractures. Elena's reflection in the mirror starts to shift. showing not the composed predator she believes herself to be, but the hollow creature underneath, starving, desperate, feeding on others, because she cannot nourish herself. As David stands to leave, Elena realizes with dawning horror that her greatest victim was never him at all. It was the woman she could have become if she hadn't chosen hunger over fulfillment, extraction over connection. The meal ends, but the hunger remains, eternal, turned inward, finally feeding on its source. Modern psychology recognizes this pattern as narcissistic feeding, first identified by Otto Kernberg, where individuals with depleted self-worth extract emotional energy from others to maintain their fragile sense of identity. We see it in the colleague who creates chaos to feel important, the friend who shares your secrets to feel powerful, the partner who picks fights to feel alive. Social media has weaponized this ancient hunger, creating platforms where emotional vampires can feed on hundreds of victims simultaneously through carefully crafted posts designed to generate worry, jealousy, or desperate attention. Schopenhauer would recognize Elena's predicament as the will's cruelest joke, the belief that we can fill our inner void by emptying others. He taught that suffering comes not from what we lack, but from the insatiable nature of wanting itself. The emotional vampire thinks she's feeding on others' pain, but she's actually consuming her own capacity for genuine connection. The will keeps her perpetually starving by convincing her that the next emotional extraction will finally satisfy the hunger that only self-acceptance can truly feed. The most dangerous predators are those who hunt unconsciously, believing themselves to be victims of their own insatiable need. What feeds on the people around you without your permission? What patterns do you repeat that leave others feeling drained while never quite filling the emptiness inside you? And if you could stop extracting life from others, what would you discover about your own capacity to generate the very nourishment you've been stealing? In the end, every emotional vampire faces the same choice: evolve beyond hunger or devour the only prey left, themselves. Behind a door that appears only at twilight, there exists a museum where all the faces you've ever worn but couldn't maintain are carefully preserved in glass cases. The curator is yourself, at 17, still believing that authenticity was optional. You enter this place every time you ask yourself who you really are beneath all the performances. Tonight, we walk these halls together and discover what Dostoevsky knew about the exhaustion of being everyone except yourself. The museum stretches infinitely in all directions, its corridors lined with cases containing faces of breathtaking variety. Here is the mask you wore during job interviews, confident but not threatening, ambitious but grateful. There, the face you donned for family gatherings, scenarings, successful enough to avoid questions, struggling enough to remain relatable. Each mask bears the fingerprints of your desperation, the invisible wear marks of a soul that forgot its own features. The lighting in this place shifts with your memories. Warm amber illuminates the cases, holding masks you wore during moments of love, softer features, eyes that promised permanence you couldn't deliver. Cold fluorescent strips cast harsh shadows over the professional masks, their expressions frozen in the permanent exhaustion of perpetual performance. Gothic candelabras flicker beside the cases holding your shadow masks, the faces you wore when you thought no one was watching, revealing glimpses of the anger, fear, and hunger you were taught to hide. The 17-year-old curator moves between the displays with practiced efficiency, polishing each surface with reverence, Their face is unmarked by the accumulated fatigue that comes from years of code switching, people-pleasing, and emotional camouflage. They still believe that the right mask worn at the right moment could solve everything. That authenticity was a luxury for people who could afford to be themselves. "Don't you remember making this one?" the curator asks, stopping before a case containing a mask of devastating vulnerability. The face you wore the night you tried to tell someone who you really were. The mask's eyes are slightly too wide, the mouth shaped in an expression of barely contained terror. You discarded it after 3 hours. "Too dangerous," you said, "too real." As you walk deeper into the museum, you notice something disturbing. The cases are beginning to crack. Hairline fractures spread across the glass like spider webs, and from within, you can hear the faint sound of your own voice. Younger versions of yourself, trapped behind each facade, screaming to be remembered. The masks themselves have started to deteriorate, their carefully constructed features blurring at the edges, as if they can no longer hold the weight of pretense. In the museum's heart lies the most terrifying exhibit of all, an empty case with your name engraved on a brass plate. "This was meant to hold your true face," the curator explains, their voice heavy with an ancient sadness. "But you never brought it in. We've been waiting 30 years for delivery." You realize, with dawning horror, that you cannot remember what your authentic face looks like. Somewhere between the first mask and the 1000th, you lost track of the original. The museum begins to collapse, not from external force, but from internal contradiction. Masks without wearers, performances without audiences, faces without souls. The entire structure has been built on a foundation of negation. As you run toward the exit, you catch a glimpse of yourself in a broken mirror. No mask, no performance, just the terrifying and beautiful nakedness of being exactly who you are. Carl Jung first described this exhausting phenomenon as the persona, the mask we wear to meet the demands of our social world. Originating from the Latin word for the masks worn by ancient actors, the persona becomes pathological when we forget we're performing. We see it in the Instagram influencer whose curated life bears no resemblance to their lived experience, the executive who succeeds at work while dying inside, the friend who's always fine while drowning in private despair. Modern therapy offices have become museums of discarded masks, where people finally admit they've forgotten who they were before they learned who they should be. Schopenhauer warned that the will tricks us into believing we can escape suffering through camouflage, but the mask always weighs more than the face it hides. He understood that our personas are not protection, but prison. Each false face we wear takes us further from the only identity that could ever truly satisfy us. The will feeds on our fear of authenticity, convincing us that our real self is too dangerous, too broken, too much, or too little to be lovable. The heaviest mask you'll ever wear is the one that hides you from yourself. Which of your faces are you most afraid to remove? What would collapse in your life if people saw you without the careful construction of your personas? And perhaps, most frightening of all, if you stopped maintaining all these masks, would you remember what you actually look like? Or would you have to start from scratch, learning to recognize yourself for the very first time? The museum door appears only at twilight, because that's when the light is ambiguous enough to make all faces look possible, and all possibilities look like faces you could finally dare to wear. A man builds the most beautiful prison ever conceived, with bars made of his mother's expectations, walls constructed from childhood wounds. and windows that show only the life he believes he doesn't deserve. The lock has no key because he throws it away the moment the door closes. He calls it safety. The world calls it self-sabotage. This is the story of how we become both prisoner and warden, and why some cages are so lovely. We forget we built them ourselves. Tonight, we watch a master craftsman complete his life's work. A prison so perfect, he almost convinces himself it's home. Thomas has been constructing this cage for 43 years, though he wouldn't call it that. To him, it's prudent life management, careful risk assessment, reasonable boundaries. The structure rises in the center of what could have been a garden, but instead serves as a workshop for his ongoing project of limitation. Each bar has been forged from specific moments. The time his mother sighed when he showed her his painting. The colleague who got the promotion he deserved but never asked for. The woman who said yes to dinner but never called again. These moments, polished smooth by decades of handling, form the skeleton of his confinement. The cage itself defies conventional architecture. Its bars shimmer with an opalescent quality that makes them appear sometimes silver, sometimes golden, depending on the angle of observation. They're spaced just wide enough that escape seems perpetually possible, until Thomas approaches the gaps and discovers they've narrowed, not through external manipulation, but through the accumulation of his own doubts. The floor is made of mirrors that reflect not his current self, but every version of himself he's convinced he cannot become. The artist, the lover, the risk-taker, the failure, the success, all equally terrifying in their potential. Around the cage, tools lie scattered like archaeological evidence of possibility, paintbrushes with dried paint, business cards for calls never made, love letters never sent, applications for jobs that seemed too ambitious, plane tickets to cities where he might have lived different lives. The air inside the cage tastes of comfort and stagnation in equal measure, thick with the familiar toxins of justified limitation. Outside, the world moves with the dangerous rhythm of chance and change, while inside, Thomas maintains the illusion of control through the architecture of impossibility. The most insidious feature of his construction is the viewing windows, crystalline panels that show him glimpses of the life he could be living. Through one, he watches himself accepting that promotion, confident and capable. Through another, he sees himself painting masterpieces that hang in galleries where strangers feel less alone. A third window shows him in love with a woman who appreciates his careful heart, who understands that his caution comes from tenderness, not cowardice. These windows aren't torture devices, they're pressure valves, allowing him to experience possibility without the terror of actually pursuing it. But tonight, something shifts in the cage's foundation. Thomas notices that his reflection in the mirrored floor has begun to change. Instead of showing him all the selves he cannot become, it begins revealing the self he's already become, the architect of his own limitations, the engineer of his own impossibility. He sees with sudden clarity that every bar was crafted by his own hands, every lock installed by his own fear. The cage doesn't protect him from failure. It guarantees it through prevention. As dawn breaks o'er his workshop of limitation, Thomas makes a discovery that will either liberate or destroy him. The door was never locked at all. It was simply designed to open outward, and he's been pushing inward for 43 years. The choice has always been his, not to escape the cage, but to admit he built it, to acknowledge that safety and imprisonment can wear the same face until you're ready to see the difference. Psychologists recognize this pattern as learned helplessness. first identified by Martin Seligman in experiments that demonstrated how perceived powerlessness could persist even when actual escape became possible. We see it in the talented employee who never applies for leadership roles, the artist who keeps their work hidden in drawers, the person who ends relationships before they can deepen. Modern self-help culture often misses the sophisticated engineering involved. These aren't simple fears, but carefully constructed systems designed to protect us from the very experiences we most desperately want. Schopenhauer understood that the will often disguises our deepest desires as our greatest fears. The cage builder doesn't fear failure, he fears success, not because he doesn't want it, but because wanting it has hurt him before. The will convinces him that the pain of limitation is preferable to the pain of disappointment, that the ache of the unlived life is more manageable than the potential devastation of the life fully engaged. But Schopenhauer also knew that the cage we build to protect us from suffering becomes the very mechanism that guarantees it. The most beautiful prison is the one that looks like wisdom from the inside and cowardice from the outside, but feels like love to the one who built it. What bars have you polished so smooth they feel like part of your identity? What doors in your life swing outward while you continue pushing inward, convinced they're locked? And if you could see the blueprint of the cage you've spent years constructing, would you recognize it as protection or prison? And more importantly, would you have the courage to walk out the door you've always had the power to open? Some cages are so beautiful that leaving them feels like destroying art, but staying in them is the destruction of the artist. In a house where every surface tells flattering lies, there exists one mirror that shows only truth. It hangs in the bathroom where you brush your teeth each morning, surrounded by reflections that whisper sweet deceptions about your importance, your beauty, your inevitable success. But this mirror, cracked down the center like a broken heart, reflects something more dangerous than your appearance. It shows you exactly who you are when no one else is watching. The house itself has been carefully designed to support delusion. Every window reflects your best angle. Every photograph has been filtered through the soft focus of self-deception. But you cannot avoid the honest mirror forever. And today is the day it finally speaks. The house sprawls through impossible dimensions, each room a shrine to a different aspect of your curated self-image. In the living room, mirrors show you animated and charismatic, the kind of person others are drawn to at parties. The bedroom mirrors reflect back a lover worth waiting for, sensual and mysterious. The office mirrors display a professional destined for greatness, confident and respected. These are not ordinary mirrors, but feeding devices, nourishing the ego with carefully distorted reflections that keep you comfortable in your own skin. The walls themselves seem to pulse with affirmation, painted in colors that complement your complexion, decorated with achievements, both real and imagined. Picture frames hold photographs where you appear perpetually younger, happier, surrounded by people who look like they genuinely enjoy your company. The furniture has been arranged to create flattering angles, the lighting designed to hide the accumulated wear of poor choices and postponed growth. But in the bathroom, hanging above a sink, stained with the evidence of daily rituals, the cracked mirror waits with infinite patience. Its surface bears the jagged line that runs from the top left corner to the bottom right, not from accident, but from the day you first looked into it and couldn't bear what you saw. You tried to remove it once, but discovered it was somehow integral to the house's structure. Remove the honest mirror, and the entire edifice of comfortable deception would collapse. This morning, Like every morning for the past year, you attempt to avoid eye contact with your reflection. You focus on brushing your teeth, on the mundane mechanics of grooming, but the cracked mirror has other plans. In its fractured surface, you see not the person you present to the world, but the person you are when the presentations end, tired, lonely, performing a life that feels increasingly like a costume that no longer fits. The crack down the mirror's center seems to widen as you watch, and in that expanding fissure, you glimpse the terrifying possibility of integration. What would it mean to let the person in the cracked mirror shake hands with all those flattering reflections in the other rooms? What would happen if you admitted that the successful professional in the office mirror and the charismatic partygoer in the living room and the mysterious lover in the bedroom were all partial truths, fragments of yourself scattered across surfaces that refuse to show the whole picture? As you finally meet your own eyes in the cracked mirror, something unprecedented happens. You smile. Not the practiced smile you wear for others, not the confident grin you've perfected for photographs, but the real smile of someone who has finally decided to stop running from their own face. The crack in the mirror begins to heal, but not in the way you expected. Instead of disappearing, it transforms into a line of gold, the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken things are mended with precious metals to highlight rather than hide their damage. The house around you starts to change. The other mirrors lose their flattering distortion, beginning to show you as you actually are. Not perfect, but whole. Not idealized, but real. The most surprising discovery is that the truth, while initially terrifying, proves to be lighter than the weight of constant performance. Psychologists call this phenomenon radical acceptance, a concept developed by Marsha Linehan as part of dialectical behavior therapy, where we cease fighting against reality and begin working with what actually is rather than what we wish were true. We see the resistance to this mirror everywhere, in the social media profiles that bear no resemblance to lived experience, in the relationships maintained through careful curation of appealing qualities, in the careers built on presenting expertise we don't actually possess. The modern world has become a house of flattering mirrors, and we're all slowly suffocating from the lack of honest reflection. Schopenhauer taught that suffering comes not from reality itself, but from the gap between reality and our desires. The cracked mirror represents the will's greatest fear, not death or failure, but the annihilation of illusion. When we finally see ourselves as we are, the will can no longer use the promise of becoming someone better as a tool of endless dissatisfaction. This is why the honest mirror seems so dangerous. It threatens the very mechanism by which the will keeps us perpetually striving and never arriving. The mirror that refuses to lie is the only one that can show you how beautiful the truth of yourself actually is, cracks and all. What would you see if you looked into your life without the filters of justification, explanation, or hope for who you might someday become? What aspects of yourself have you been avoiding in the bathroom mirror of honest self-reflection? And perhaps, most challenging of all, if you stopped maintaining the house of flattering illusions, if you let every mirror in your life show you the truth, would you discover that the person you've been trying to hide is actually the person you've been trying to find? The mirror cracks, not because it cannot bear the truth, but because we cannot until we can. And then it heals with gold, and we realize that our breaks were always the places where the light was meant to enter.